Good day, boxing fans. This weekend is Mexican Independence Weekend, and if you're a boxing fan, you know what that means. The biggest star of the sport, Canelo Alvarez, is going to get into the ring again to do what he does best and defend his undisputed world super middleweight titles in Las Vegas on Netflix for those of us sitting at home across the ocean. And he's taking on the former lightweight champion, the former undisputed junior welterweight and undisputed welterweight champion of the world, the undefeated Terence "Bud" Crawford. Crawford is daring to be great. He's taking a massive chance going that far up in weight. Is he a generational talent? Is he going to pull it off against an also great Canelo Alvarez? Or will the gap in weight just be too much? Will there be a reason why there is weight divisions? If you want to break down the fight with me, stick around. A good big one will always beat a good smaller one, so the saying goes. But once every so often, it's rare but it does happen, a great smaller one beats a merely good big one. Is that the case here on Saturday in Las Vegas? Canelo Alvarez is a big favourite, but there are those insiders who think Terence Crawford can pull it off. Now, if you've watched this channel for a while, you know I'm a big Bud Crawford guy. I always thought he would beat Errol Spence. He did. And Canelo is also somebody that he's got his haters, which I don't always understand, but you have to respect him. He's always somebody who, like Crawford, has dared to stretch himself to be great. Sometimes it didn't work out, like against Dimitri Bivol. He went a little bit too far up in weight, I think. And way back then, you know, he rolled the dice against Floyd Mayweather and he got beaten. But aside from that, you know, Canelo Alvarez has done very, very well. There's very few people out there who he has not fought. You know, people will talk about David Benavidez, and there's that one, yes, but also you got to give Benavidez some fault for that as well, not making weight. If he stayed at super middleweight when Canelo was unifying, then that fight might have happened. Now, if we look at both of these fighters, they don't have the greatest momentum behind them running into this fight on Saturday night. If you look at Canelo Alvarez, you know, he's been kind of underwhelming in his last few fights against William Skull. I didn't watch that fight because I thought it would be a bad fight style-wise. And, you know, I was right. Skull just got on his bicycle and just tried to survive, so it was an awful fight. And before that, against Edgar Berlanga, he was also a little bit underwhelming. You know, Canelo these days don't seem to really go for the knockout. He fights well within himself. But having said that, you know, if he was an unknown beating those names, we would have ranted and raved about him. Now, Terence Crawford had that career-defining win over Errol Spence Jr., unifying all the welterweight titles, and that was a really good victory for him. You know, before that, he was a lightweight champion. He was undisputed at junior welterweight and was undisputed at welterweight as well. And, you know, he's done everything that's been asked of him, but he sometimes lacked a big star B-sides opposite the ring from him. And, you know, he moved up to junior middleweight in his last fight, picked up an interim belt against a very difficult Israel Madrimov. He did not look good against Madrimov. He won a close-ish decision, you know, but then does that bode well for the Canelo Alvarez fight? I think we can throw both men's last fights out of a window, you know. Nobody would have looked good against Skull, and Israel Madrimov is a very tricky guy, you know. Lots of foot feints, lots of head and glove feints, you know, and he's got that herky-jerky, bouncy style, you know, forward, backward, side. You never know where the shot is going to come from. So he's a very awkward fighter. You know, Canelo tends to be flat on his feet. He's not really that sort of style as Israel Madrimov. So that's not going to be a factor. Now, Crawford does have a significant reach advantage over Canelo, but Canelo is a sort of stocky, squat fighter. He's used to being at a reach disadvantage. You know, can can Terence Crawford hurt Saul Canelo Alvarez? That's the only outcome of this fight that would really shock me, if Crawford is able to hurt and stop Canelo Alvarez. I just can't see that happening. Nobody's ever stopped Canelo before. You know, he's got a very solid chin against stronger and harder hitting men than Terence Crawford. So that part I can't see. You know, Crawford had a very nice knockout streak running for him there at welterweight. Was quite an impressive streak. And he looked very good, you know, but he couldn't turn the trick against Madrimov. So one would just hope that he carries enough pop at super middleweight, you know, to keep Canelo Alvarez honest. And Terence Crawford really, I think, is a terrific fighter. He's somewhat like Lomachenko to me, you know, in the sense that he reads his opponent for the first few rounds, and then he makes those adjustments. He can fight equally well as a southpaw or as an orthodox fighter, which is something that is rare. You know, he had very good power up until now. I don't think he's going to have the power at super middleweight. That's a bit too far north. But he's a very good boxer, excellent counter puncher. You know, he can do a bit of everything, a really versatile fighter. Now, Canelo Alvarez is also a guy who can box and can fight. You know, but he's become a sort of a stalking boxer, sometimes stalking pressure fighter, not that swarming, high volume Mexican style of some of his compatriots, but he's very accurate with his shots. He's got a good defense. It's hard to hit Canelo. Very good upper body sway, very good upper body movement. And that might be an issue for Terence Crawford. Now, how great is Terence Crawford? That is the one question that we must ask, because if he can go up all this way in weight and upset Canelo Alvarez, it's really one for the record books. I think both men are already first ballot Hall of Famers with the careers that they've had, but it will be something really special. Now, people say Terence Crawford, undisputed welterweight, former undisputed welterweight champion, but people forget he started his world championship career as a lightweight. That's where he was first world champion at. And has there ever been a lightweight world champion that went all the way up to super middleweight to win a world title? There has, you know, and that's my late friend here, South Africa's very own Rose of Soweto, Dingaan Tobela, who was a former WBO and WBA world lightweight champion, and through an up and down career, wins and losses, years later, went all the way up to super middleweight and beat Glenn Catley for the WBC super middleweight belt. Now, there's a big gap between Glenn Catley and Canelo Alvarez, and there's also a gap between Terence Crawford and the late Dingaan Tobela. It's different level fighters, but it shows you that it can be possible. Although what does worry me about Crawford, you know, he went from welterweight, had one fight at junior middleweight, and now he's jumping all the way to super middleweight. Didn't really have a chance to grow into the division. And I think the big question mark here is, can Canelo Alvarez will be too strong and too powerful for Terence Crawford if he hits him and he tees off on him? Because Canelo does have some mustard on his shots when he opens up. He just doesn't. I get the feeling he's careful for emptying the tank and going for a knockout. He stays within himself, you know. So that's the thing, you know. If at some point Canelo Alvarez is going to crack Bud Crawford one, and is he going to keel over then? You know, we remember what happened to Amir Khan when he went up from welterweight to Canelo. That was then at middleweight. You know, he boxed fairly well with his speed and boxing skills, and then Canelo nailed him with a right hand and planted him on the canvas. Will that happen to Bud Crawford? That is possible, you know, although, once again, Bud Crawford is a different kettle of fish than Amir Khan, a much better fighter and a much better chin. But will hold up against Saul Canelo Alvarez? That is a big question mark, and I honestly don't know, you know. I can surely envision that Canelo will crack Crawford with one, and he won't be able to stand up to that power, and, you know, Alvarez will open up and take Crawford out. That's a very possible outcome to the fight. But, you know, I can also see Crawford with his big skill set, you know, shifting to southpaw and shifting to orthodox round after round and keeping that jab going and finding holes in Canelo Alvarez and picking him off with the counters as he moves in. What's going to happen here? You know, the logic tells you it's just too big a jump in weight. But I've always been a Terence Crawford fan. I think he's kind of special. And I think he will lift his performance to the level of his opponents, you know. We saw that against Errol Spence. We saw that against his biggest name opponents, that he lifts his performance accordingly. And there's no pressure on him because nobody's expecting him to win, only the pressure that Crawford puts on himself, you know. And he's got a really dangerous opponent in front of him. If he makes mistakes here, he could be going home early. So I think that will fire Crawford up and motivate him, you know. So for Crawford, I think he's got to keep that jab going. Canelo Alvarez, admittedly, he's hard to keep at the end of your jab. He's got excellent head movement. So he's going to have to vary that jab, vary the speed, upstairs, downstairs, and maybe switch side, you know, go and jab with the right hand with his back to the southpaw and show him a lot of angles. We know Alvarez doesn't like a lot of movement, doesn't like a lot of angles. He's not always the best at going to chase a guy down and cutting off a ring. So although he mustn't run and just dog it like William Skull to survive, and I don't think Crawford will do that. He's going to try and win, but he'll need to use his feet. He'll need to use movement, and he'll need to be a little bit busier than normal, and try and just pot shot and outbox Canelo Alvarez. Now for Alvarez, I think Canelo needs to avoid being too aggressive against Crawford, you know, really going after him unless he's got him hurt. If he's too aggressive early on against Crawford, you know, and just tries to bully and overwhelm the smaller man, I think that's when he can make mistakes, and that's when Crawford can walk him onto punches. So if I was Canelo Alvarez, I'll just hang back a bit. I'll let Crawford do his thing and let Crawford get complacent and then let rip with that straight right hand, because Madrimov caught Crawford's flush a couple of times with the right hands, you know, and I think the right hand of Canelo Alvarez is better than Madrimov's, and he caught Terence Crawford a couple of times. So if I was Canelo Alvarez, I'll try and hang back a little bit, make Crawford come to him, make him get a bit overly aggressive, and then counter him, knock him down, hurt him with something, see if he can take him out. And of course, the body is a big target, so work that body, because if you look at, you know, as I've said, they're about the same height. Crawford is slightly taller, but he's got a significant reach. But if you work that body, you know, Crawford's got the thinner torso of the two. I think those body shots of a Canelo Alvarez may hurt him, and that might be a key to the fight for Canelo. So, guys, tell me below in the comments, who do you have winning this? Do you have Terence Crawford springing the upset, or is it just too big an ask to jump in weight against Canelo Alvarez? Whatever, you have to respect Terence Crawford for daring to be great. I didn't think it was a smart move for Amir Khan back then to jump up and fight Canelo when he was doing so well at welterweight. I didn't think it was a smart move of Kell Brook to jump up to middleweight and fight Gennady Golovkin. And if Crawford loses, people are going to say this was not a smart move on his part. But, you know, I think there's no shame in daring to be great and falling short. And if it's a competitive loss, that's also a positive a tick on your legacy. I believe there's such a thing as a good loss, and I don't believe a loss is the end of the world. But I've got to stick my neck out here, and you know, the size difference is a big thing. But you know, there's a lot of pressure on Canelo actually in a different way than there is on Crawford, because if he loses here against Crawford, his haters are going to have a field day for losing against a smaller man. But is Crawford that special? I'm going to stick my neck out and say that yes, I think Terence Crawford is maybe that special, that generational talent, and he can find a way to best Canelo Alvarez. So I'm going to go for Terence Crawford to find the clear shots, to survive the rocky moments against Canelo Alvarez, and show why he's such an awkward, such a good boxer, and score the upset, perhaps by a split decision win, to become the undisputed super middleweight champion. So I'm riding with Crawford. I'm not at all going to bet the house on it. I don't feel too sure about it at all. You know, but I'm a Bud guy. I think he is an amazing fighter, not to say that Canelo isn't. So I'm going to go with Crawford this time. Might have a lot of egg on my face, but I just have a feeling about Crawford. Let's see. Maybe the weight is too much. But Crawford, yeah, I think he's going to somehow find a way to pull it off against Canelo Alvarez. Well, that's it from me, guys. Please remember to punch that subscribe button. It doesn't cost you anything. It helps the channel. And if you watch this far, you might as well. And until I see you guys again, remember to keep those hands up.